Hello, everyone, and welcome to War and Literature, English 1120. This is our second, I believe, of 5 lectures on Homer's Iliad. So in previous lectures, we've done the first introduction to Homer was our first lecture, and then in the first lecture on the Iliad, we looked at the question of honor and glory and how that motivated to a large degree the conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles. And in this class tonight, we're going to look at an overview of books 2 to 8. You didn't need to read those, but I'll just fill in some of the blanks for you so you know how the story is progressing. And we'll also look at book 9, where we have the famous embassy to Achilles, pleading with him to try to come back to the fighting. Before we get started, I want to check in with everyone, get a sense, since we've kind of started on the readings now, get a sense of how people are finding the reading. You should have read for tonight, hopefully read book 1 and book 9. And I think this week you're supposed to have read books 9 and 16, but just give me a sense if you've read it, or have you encountered Homer before? What were some of your initial thoughts? And if you want to turn on your camera or unmute, please do so. So Tina's saying already at book 16. Great. Have people come across this before, perhaps in high school or in other endeavors where they've maybe read summaries of the Iliad or heard about it? Nope, I have not. So no takers on this. So this is the first real introduction to it for everyone. Caleb is saying, I read a bit, heard about it, never read it till now. For those of you who are brave enough to come off, turn the camera on or come on camera, maybe initial impressions, is it kind of what you expected in terms of tone, language? Milan, I believe is pronounced Milan. Sharma is saying slides helped me understand book 1. I'm glad that they were helpful. My mic's not working. Okay, I understand. So some of you, maybe your mic's not working. Matilda or Matilde, you want to come in? Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I was just gonna briefly add to what you said. It was kind of what I expected, I guess. The writing, there were a few times I had to read it over a couple times just to really understand it. But it's interesting trying to understand something that's like, it's the same language, but it can mean different things, kind of.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So definitely, probably a lot of things going on there. The tone is quite a bit different. And just to clarify, just to make sure everyone knows, it's obviously written originally in Greek. So what we're reading is a translation by Robert Fagles. So the English translation is trying to mirror to some extent, let's say, the rhythm, the tone of the original, but we'll never quite get that. But so what you're encountering that's perhaps a little strange is probably, let's say, things around rhythm, around tone, also the topic, just the attitudes of the characters probably as well. So Caleb, I saw your hand. Did you want to unmute and share thoughts?
Hello, Professor.
Hi.
So I had a question about when the assignment was due. Is it?
Sure.
Are we going to be reading book 1 in order to complete the assignment, or do we have to read from book 1 all the way to like book 16 to be able to figure out the assignment?
Well, ideally, I guess when is the assignment due? It's due a couple weeks from now, I believe, February 3rd, I believe, something like that. Someone double check that for me?
Yeah, it's February 3rd.
Right. So you have a couple weeks. So I would say ideally you've read or have a sense of all of the books that we were to have read by that point in time. But wherever you are in the readings, give your initial impressions. That's what I would encourage you to do. And as I said, it's not it's basically complete the assignment and you'll get the marks. So it's not as though I'm going to be testing you for knowledge and, oh, so-and-so didn't refer to book 16, so they didn't do it, that kind of thing. So just do it based on your perceptions and what you know.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? I think there was another hand there. I thought there was another hand. Taylor, maybe?
Hello.
Hi.
I was just going to say, I've heard of Homer before, but this is my first time reading. I saw the Iliad at a thrift store, I think in the summer, and I happened to pick it up. So I was happy that I already had and the exact translation that we're using. So that was lucky. And yeah, I really like it. I'm surprised at how much I'm able to understand it. I took philosophy last semester, as probably a lot of people did. And we read Plato's Republic. So I find that that's really helping just with like the language and like kind of the state of mind back then, because it's obviously very different from how things are now. But yeah, I find it really interesting, and I'm kind of surprised at how much I'm enjoying it, to be honest. So yeah.
张嘉译、张宇轩，然后蒋希远，我，还有刘云山，你跟刘云山关系怎么样？
Hello, I'm just not making that out. Is this Tianjin Ma? Hello? Maybe that was an accidental unmute. Yeah, so good points, Taylor. Yeah, so I'm glad it's surprisingly enjoyable. That's great. And as you said, one point I'll pick up on is your reference to those who have read the Republic. Definitely a lot of crossovers. So, and we'll probably mention a couple of points during lecture where Plato and Homer are intersecting on a couple of key issues. So Plato's writing a few hundred years later and responding to Homer. So Homer was pretty much in Greek culture. It's often said that in Greek culture, he's kind of akin, or his writings kind of akin to a Bible in terms of being something that everyone was expected to have read, or let's say a Bible maybe 100 years ago when it was something that was kind of studied in school more as a rule, let's say in Christian countries. And then so for Greek culture, Homer was like that. Every kid was grown up and understood that and tried to emulate Achilles or Odysseus, and they were portrayed as heroes. And Plato comes along and criticizes, as other philosophers did, some of the values and virtues that were upheld in the Homeric and other literary epics, and thus we have what later became called what Plato calls the quarrel of philosophy and poetry, is these kind of the debate on the value of each. So good point there. I noticed in the chat a couple of good comments here. So we've been corrected here. It's February 4th. Kevin G and Olivia are telling me it's the 4th for the assignment. And so trust them, but also double check on the syllabus as well. Trust but verify is a Russian proverb. And someone's mentioning actually enjoyable, surprisingly easy to read, much easier to understand than Shakespeare. So that's a good point. So a lot of people will say, okay, well, Shakespeare, it's kind of older language, so it's difficult to understand. And that's true, right? A lot of people will call it Old English. It's not technically Old English. We'll talk about that later. Well, when we talk about Shakespeare, it's actually modern English in terms of the history of the language. It's just that it's early modern language, and our language over the last few hundred years has changed its vocabulary a little bit, but the basic structure of the language and is the same, where as opposed to Old English is a totally different language. And I can't read Old English. I know individual words, but I can't read it. It's basically a foreign language. Okay, so why would Homer in this case be easier to read? Well, I would submit, I guess part of it is the translation effect. So Homer's Greek obviously would be impossible for anyone to read unless they read ancient Greek, but it's been translated into a modern idiom. So we don't have that separation of lexicon for a few centuries that we have with Shakespeare. So in that way, it's a bit easier to read. In some ways, Shakespeare is going to be closer to us in terms of the value system that it's portraying, like ancient Greek is portraying that ancient value system of a warrior ethos that ethos is somewhat removed from us, but the language as translated into modern English is somewhat closer. Okay, any other comments? So that's good feedback. I'm glad people are diving in. I'm glad people are, as I said, if you hadn't been introduced to it before, I'm glad people are diving in and say in some cases pleasantly surprised, some cases thankful for the slides to guide them through, that type of thing. So why don't we get started with tonight's discussion? As I said, we're going to look at books 2 to 9. And sorry, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to respond to a chat question here, which is a good one from Joanna. Joanna's asking, can we submit the assignment, I guess now, if we've read up until book 16, or should we wait until the 4th? I would submit it now. If you want to go and say, here's my, book based on books 1 to 16 and general thoughts, as I said, however it's phrased in the assignment, but 100 to 150 words of your thoughts on the work. Yep. So please go ahead if you want to space out your work for the term. That's a good strategy. Okay, so we're going to go books 2 to 9. I'll share the PowerPoint presentation here. And if you do have a comment, maybe raise your hand. Once the PowerPoint's on, I can't see the chat too well. So if you want to raise your hand, and I'll ask you to unmute. So as I said, we'll do a quick overview of books 2 to 8, and we'll again, you're not expected to read this, but in order to understand the rest, it's good to have a sense of generally of the plot, right, of what's going on. So book 2 opens with Zeus sending a deceiving dream to Agamemnon, telling him to attack at once. So something that we're going to discuss a couple of times here is this question of Agamemnon's leadership abilities. Agamemnon believes the dream, but he first decides to test the men under his command by telling them he thinks it's time to cut their losses and head home. So he thinks this is, a good test, and what he's hoping, I guess, as a response is they're going to go, no, come on, we got to get going, and we can do this, and don't be silly, and that it would rouse them up more. It actually backfires. Instead of rousing them, they're excited by the prospect. Most of them are excited by the prospect, and they begin to prepare the ships to leave. And I'm just pointing out, if you notice the second sub-bullet there, a couple other parts in the epic where Agamemnon gives parallel orders that they should prepare to leave. Book 9. That time in book 9, he really is in despair and wants to leave. He wants to cut their losses, and it's not a test. And then later in his discussion with the captains, Odysseus and Diomedes, they're all wounded actually after some fighting. It doesn't look good. So he says, yeah, well, we might as well leave. And in both cases, the situations for the Greek is only saved by Diomedes and Odysseus stepping in and saving the situation. So what you could say is, in terms of, let's say, as military leader, Agamemnon does not know his men, I guess is one way of putting it. And I'm borrowing this way of phrasing it from Thomas Vargish in this article I've cited here. He doesn't know his men because he's lost touch with himself, and his whole drive is out of blind ambition. So he's lost touch with, let's say, his inner essence, and is driven only by the desire to accumulate more power and wealth, and out of all proportion, like to an excessive end. Now, I wanted to say quickly a word about leadership. Let's say, so leadership, whether it's military leadership or leadership of business or political leadership, I think there's general models, you could say, let's say in the ancient world, and a general model in today's world, let's say the modern world, and there's some overlaps and there's some differences. So if we think about a leader today, so if we start with the modern leader, I would say a kind of the contemporary, whether it's spoken or unspoken, the contemporary ideal of the leader to some extent is the servant leader. It's one phrase in kind of leadership discussions about styles of leadership. So the servant leader, puts the interests of the many above him or herself. Okay, so the servant leader is there in order to allow the individuals within the group to thrive to the greatest extent. Okay, so we see that leadership as, so there's a certain humility to that leadership style. The servant leader is putting the interests of others first. It listens to the group, wants to, let's say, coach, mentor the individuals in the group to reach their fullest potential, ensure that they're inspired to reach their full potential. They're inspired to see a goal beyond themselves, that type of thing. So that's a certain, as I said, model of leadership that's probably, whether it's phrased that way or not exactly, it's an ideal of leadership you get in the modern world. Now, there's some overlaps and differences that in the ancient model of leadership. Okay, so what the ancient model of leadership in no way could be seen as a servant model, right? So Achilles as a leader or Agamemnon as a leader, they're the ideal that they would want to attain to in leading the Greeks, or Achilles in leading the Myrmidons, is in no way to serve the other interests and take a step back and not to have the limelight, and to mentor and foster the others in the group. Remember, their interest is about getting the glory and honor themselves, right? I want to show that I'm the greatest. It's all about me. You guys are here for me, right? So it's a different model. But what the overlap is that in each case, they're inspiring the group to be more than themselves. So we see, oh boy, that Achilles is so great at what he does, and makes me want to try to be more. And Achilles maybe is able to lead his group to greater heights of achievement because of that inspiration. In addition, in both models of leadership, individuals are taken out of themselves, right? They're taken out of their own, let's say, petty individual existences and drives, and they're given a higher goal. So both in the modern notion of leadership, the leader, I think, is seen as a great leader if they can inspire the individual to see beyond their own individual, let's say, needs or desires to some sort of higher goal that they can contribute to, a higher, let's say, group goal. So too with the ancient model of leadership, if they can allow the individual to see a purpose beyond themselves, then that is leadership. So there are those points of overlap, but I would distinguish. I just want to make sure that we understand that this ancient notion of leadership would not have that quality of the leader being a servant to others. So even if Agamemnon, though, to go back to Agamemnon, even if Agamemnon's not exactly being a servant, nor should he expect it to be in this culture, he should at least know his troops so that he's able to lead them to, let's say, transcend themselves to a higher purpose. Here, he doesn't know them. He doesn't know what drives them, and he doesn't have a good sense of the level of desperation that's already there, and that he needs to bring them out of that. He needs to inspire them with the feeling that they can achieve more than they would otherwise by themselves. Okay, I see there's something in the chat. Is there a Discord for this class? I don't understand that question, Matilda, or is Matilde? Maybe you can unmute.
Hey, it's Matilde. It's just Discord is a place for group chats for students.
Oh, so yeah, thanks. No, I have not set one up. There are discussion forums there that either for your assignment, or you can set up a different threads for discussion, or I think I saw in that discussion forum someone had set up a WhatsApp if you wanted to use that as a discussion forum, but I have not set one up as part of this this class. There's also the chat bar here, right, during the class. Okay,
thank you.
Hope that's helpful. Yep. Discord for this class. It just shows you how out of it I am when it comes to this stuff, right? And I had no idea what I was thinking there. Okay. So we have a sense of leadership, what that means for the moderns versus the ancients, and a sense that whatever model we're using, Achilles is failing on several grounds. So Odysseus shows more leadership qualities here. This is book 2. People are unruly. They're trying to get the ships ready to go. Some of the more common and more revile characters, such as I'm drawing a blank on this character's name. It's neither here nor there, but these common ugly characters that Odysseus cannot stomach. He needs to rally them back into the common cause, so to speak. So this is a speech from Odysseus. When he caught some common soldier shouting out, he beat him with the scepter, dress him down. You fool, sit still, obey the commands of others, your superiors. You deserter, rank coward, you count for nothing, neither in war nor council. How can all Achaeans be masters here in Troy? Too many kings can ruin an army, mob rule. Let there be one commander, one master only, endowed by the son of crooked-minded Cronus with a kingly scepter and royal rights of custom, whatever one man needs to lead his people well. So here we have this sense of kind of, it's really pyramidal structure of leadership, where the many form this broad base that is just, its sole purpose is merely to prop up a few great individuals, which again is contrary to the, let's say, the servant model, where the one or the few serve, let's say, the individual flourishing of many, and not the many as a group, not the many as a pyramid, the many as in their individual let's say, manifestations. So Odysseus again, and then later Diomedes, and throughout Achilles as, let's say, models of leadership and heroism in contrast to Agamemnon. In book 2, we also have this catalog of the ships. It's a famous episode, and later Christopher Marlowe would in a famous line in Dr. Faustus would say, "Is this the face?" Speaking of Helen of Troy, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? So in this catalog of ships, there's about a little over 1,000 listed, and he lists from such and such an island, they sent 50 ships, and they, including such and such hero, and so these troops who were good with the sling, and from this land with its many sheep, they sent this many ships, and including this hero who was so strong, or whatever. So it's an extensive list. It's nearly 300 lines, as you can see from the citation. And because it's such a, let's say, an epic list, remember I mentioned this is one of the features, one of the conventions of epics is to have this, because everything with epic has to be grand in scale, right? So the list itself is exhaustive. It's extensive. It's 300 lines long. And because it's so exhaustive, because it's reaching into details that Homer, the poet, would never have access to, he has another invocation of the muse. So help me, muse, tell the ships in all their numbers. So the Greek and Trojan armies meet, and they propose a one-on-one duel between Menelaus and Paris, the rivals of Helen and the whole reason that everyone's fighting there. And so Priam, there's some interesting scenes there where Priam and the Trojans are, including Helen, watch from the walls of Troy. And Paris, who's a lover, not a fighter, so to speak, is about to lose this quite quickly when Aphrodite magically whisks him off the battlefield and back to Troy. And Menelaus is declared the winner and acknowledged as the rightful husband of Helen. They looks like they're on the verge of peace. It looks like everything's going to be resolved, but Hera and Athena, who hate Troy because of the judgment of Paris, which we discussed in the lecture on the introduction to Homer, they want the fighting to continue, right? They want Troy to fall. So if peace is resolved, they're not going to get their end. And it actually would also foil fate, because we know, and we'll talk about fate at the end of this lecture, Troy is fated to fall. Hector is fated to die. All these things are fated. So it would also go against what has been apportioned as the length of existence for Troy. So they induce a Trojan called Pandarus to break the truce. He shoots an arrow at Menelaus, and the fighting erupts again. And so the battle goes back and forth. And in book 5, we have this sequence of inspired military excellence called an Aristeia by Diomedes, during which he injures Aphrodite. And it's kind of a humorous scene. She goes back to Mount Olympus because she's injured. I think she's hurt on the wrist or something like that, like a spear has kind of cut her wrist, this goddess. And so she flees from the fighting because, although a god, she's not known for her military prowess, I guess. And she heads back, and she's kind of lightly teased by Zeus and the other gods there, kind of, "Oh, poor baby, did one of those little humans hurt you?" That kind of tone. And we'll talk more about it, but it kind of points out again the fact how when the gods fight, it's comic. When the humans fight, it's tragic / highlights the dignity of human existence, because they are, and again, the key distinction, because they're mortal. There's something at stake. when Aphrodite fights, you know, sure, she's going to get scratched and she might cry and it's kind of funny, but nothing happens after that. There's no consequences. In book 6, if you do want to, I would encourage you read the whole book. If you're pleasantly surprised, obviously, to go back and read it all when you get a chance. It's a good story, obviously, and do pay attention to this book. I found a kind of a touching book, book 6, in terms of going back and seeing a glimpse of Troy. And it's a glimpse into what the Trojans are fighting for. It's a glimpse into the life of peace and of humans in civilized existence, not killing one another, of family life, of political life, and that which ostensibly the Trojans are fighting to preserve, so to speak. So he goes back, Hector goes back, and he finds Paris there in bed with Helen, and he berates Paris for not fighting. Paris says, "Oh yeah, you're right. I don't know what I'm doing here," and says, "Yeah, I'll come with you." And then he has Hector has a poignant exchange with Helen that I'll refer you to, but I won't go to in particular. And then in a very touching scene, he sees his wife and baby son Astyanax on the walls of Troy. And again, it gives us an even, let's say, a more intimate glimpse of what they're fighting for in terms of the family life. Hector's, and I refer to a couple speeches there, and Hector's what's sometimes called his speech of the Warrior's Creed, and how one of the reasons he gives that he must fight is this sense of shame. So we talked about kind of the difference between a guilt culture and a shame culture, but part of, like, the flip side of the Greeks being so driven by honor, the flip side of that is this aversion of shame. Okay, so they seek actively external manifestations of honor, so external recognitions. So and so gave me a prize because I'm the best. Okay, so that's my external award. And what they desperately want to avoid is that external shame as well. But Hector also fights for the community. So there's this honor-shame dynamic, and then there's also this sense of family and community that he's trying to protect. So yeah, well, let's turn, as I said, to the actual text and go through that. So this is book 6, or should be book 6. Yeah, so this is the text. This is Hector meeting Andromache, and Astyanax is there. Astyanax is a baby. His son doesn't have a lot of dialogue in this, but it's his wife Andromache and Hector in exchange. This is Andromache starting here. Reckless one, my Hector, your own fiery courage will destroy you. Have you no pity for him, our helpless son, or me and the destiny that weighs me down, your widow, now so soon? Yes, soon they will kill you off, all the Achaean forces massed for assault, and then, bereft of you, better for me to sink beneath the earth. What other warmth, what comforts left for me? Once you have met your doom, nothing but torment. I have lost my father. Mother's gone as well. Father, the brilliant Achilles laid him low when he stormed Cilicia's city filled with people, Thebe with her towering gates. He killed Etion, not that he stripped his gear, he'd some respect at least, for he burned his corpse in all his blazoned bronze, then heaped a grave mound high above the ashes, and nymphs of the mountain planted elms around it, daughters of Zeus whose shield is storm and thunder. And the 7 brothers I had within our halls, all in the same day went down to the house of death. The great godlike runner Achilles butchered them all, tending their shambling oxen, shining flocks. So this story is not discussed in the Iliad much further than this oblique reference to it, and we don't have a lot of information from other stories, but so there's this notion that Achilles, in a previous sacking of another city, Andromache's original home, had killed not only Andromache's father, but her 7 brothers as well. So it hasn't happened yet, but we as an audience know that Achilles is about to kill her husband, Hector. So let's say the mounting grief of this individual is in all literature. I can't think of many people who suffer much more than Andromache. And this is Andromache's speech continued. And mother, who ruled under the timberline of woody Placos once, he no sooner hailed her here with his other plunder than he took a priceless ransom, set her free, and home she went to her father's royal halls, where Artemis, showering arrows, shot her down. You, Hector, you are my father now, my noble mother, a brother too, and you are my husband, young and warm and strong. Pity me, please. Take your stand on the rampart here before you orphan your son and make your wife a widow. Draw your armies up where the wild fig tree stands, there where the city lies most open to assault, the walls lower, easily overrun. 3 times they have tried that point, hoping to storm Troy. Their best fighters, led by the great and little Ajax, famous Idomeneus, Atreus' sons, valiant Diomedes. Perhaps a skilled prophet revealed the spot, or their own fury whips them to attack. So Hector is now her world. She's lost her original family, as we just mentioned, and the appeal to Hector here is definitely very strong. It's in terms of this duty to his wife, as all that she has, her whole world. She loses him, and her and his son will be in dire straits. She will obviously have great suffering. And tall Hector nodded, his helmet flashing. All this weighs on my mind too, dear woman, but I would die of shame. Remember that point we made on shame, honor, to face the men of Troy and the Trojan women trailing their long robes, if I would shrink from battle now, a coward. Nor does the spirit urge me on that way. I've learned it all too well, to stand up bravely, always to fight in the front ranks of Trojan soldiers, winning my father great glory for myself. For in my heart and soul, I also know this well, the day will come when sacred Troy must die. Priam must die and all his people with him. Priam, who hurls the strong ash spear. So just make a note here. In this sequence, it's almost as if Hector knows that Troy is fated to fall. He doesn't. I don't think we could say he does. In other parts of the Iliad, people say, "Oh, Troy will fall, you will die," and he taunts them back, says, "No, not as long as my arm is strong, and the gods are with us." That type of kind of defiant response, and feels that they can beat the Greeks back, and that this is not a fated end. In this sequence, in this exchange with Andromache, there's almost this tragic sense of inevitability hanging over it, that this is going to happen no matter what. We can't stop it, and all we can do is die honorably. Even so, it is less the pain of the Trojans still to come that weighs me down, not even of Hecuba herself. So Hecuba is his mother, and Priam's his father. So not even the grief he knows that Hecuba will have, and the grief and suffering of his father Priam, not even those, or the thought of my own brothers, in all their numbers, all their gallant courage, may tumble in the dust, crushed by enemies. That is nothing beside your agony, when some brazen Argive hails you off in tears, wrenching away your day of light and freedom. Then far off in the land of Argos you must live, laboring at a loom, at another woman's beck and call, fetching water at some spring, Messaeus or Hyperia, resisting it all the way, the rough yoke of necessity at your neck. And a man may say, who sees you streaming tears, there's the wife of Hector, the bravest fighter they could field, those stallion-breaking Trojans, long ago when the men fought for Troy. So he will say, and the fresh grief will swell your heart once more. Widowed, robbed of the one man strong enough to fight off your day of slavery. So Hector's kind of looking forward to this day when Andromache will be taken off in slavery after the fall of Troy to some Greek and serve in some Greek land. And this, of course, happens, right, in later developments of the story, not depicted in the Iliad. It's hauntingly depicted, or at least the immediate aftermath of the fall of Troy, in a play of Euripides called The Trojan Women. And we see Andromache there about to be sailed off in a ship with the Greeks who have now enslaved her, and Astyanax. We also see this in that play where it's reported how Astyanax is thrown off, the baby son of Hector and Andromache, thrown off the walls of Troy to die. So this kind of horrible fate for his family seems to be kind of this tragic inevitability in this scene. And as I said, it's depicted hauntingly in other works of literature that you may want to check out. So she closes her speech. No, let the earth come piling over my dead body before I hear your cries. I hear you dragged away. And the same, sorry, this is Hector. In the same breath, shining Hector reached down for his son, but the boy recoiled, cringing against his nurse's full breast, screaming out at the sight of his own father, terrified by the flashing bronze, the horsehair crest, the great ridge of the helmet, nodding, bristling terror, so it struck his eyes. And his loving father laughed. His mother laughed as well, and glorious Hector, quickly lifting the helmet from his head, set it down on the ground, fiery in the sunlight, and raising his son, he kissed him, tossed him in his arms, lifting a prayer to Zeus and the other deathless gods. Zeus, all you immortals, grant this boy, my son, may be like me, first in glory among the Trojans, strong and brave like me, and rule all Troy in power. And one day let them say he is a better man than his father, when he comes home from battle bearing the bloody gear of the mortal enemy he has killed in war, a joy to his mother's heart. So I'll just, the scene with the helmet, I think it's a couple of things I want to point out. So first of all, so the helmet scares the baby. So he's about to reach, maybe give the baby a last hug and kiss before he takes off. And he's got this helmet that's shiny, but it also has this horsehair crest. So it scares the baby. The baby's kind of cringes away. In a way, it's kind of a little symbol for how war tears apart the family, how war keeps the father away, or puts a barrier between the father predominantly and family. Also, I want to point out that a very similar, let's say, theme will be presented in the Aeneid. Okay, so here we have Hector being able to take off the helmet, and it becomes kind of a comedic little scene. It's still able to point, let's say, thematically or metaphorically to the fact that war is in a way tearing apart this family, but in the actual action, it's comedic and lighthearted. They're able to embrace. He hands back the baby. Aeneas, we'll see, never does. He only kisses his son Ascanius through a helmet. He's not able to really embrace his family in any way like Hector does. He doesn't have this kind of touching connection to family. So Hector prayed and placed his son in the arms of his loving wife. Andromache pressed the child to her scented breast, smiling through her tears. Her husband noticed, and filled with pity now, Hector stroked her gently, trying to reassure her, repeating her name. Andromache, dear one, why so desperate? Why so much grief for me? No man will hurl me down to death against my fate. And fate, no one alive has ever escaped it, neither brave man nor coward. I tell you, it's born with us the day that we are born. So please go home and tend to your own tasks, the distaff and the loom. and keep the women working hard as well. As for the fighting, men will see to that, all who were born in Troy, but I most of all. So the other thing I want to point out is his prayer for his child is also very much, I think, a depiction that you would see in any, a depiction of, let's say, a universal emotion or hopes and fears of a parent for their child, is to hope that they could be more than the parent, that they would have the utmost happiness, that they could achieve more, even in this honor culture where I am best and I must rule all. The hope is for the child to achieve beyond, and to be able to throw that stone a little bit further than the parent. So that's again a touching and a tragic scene, because we know that Astyanax will not be greater than his father. He will not live past this infancy. So in book 7 and 8, so that's book 6, so that return to Troy. Books 7 and 8, Zeus turns the battle in favor of the Trojans, and as he promised Thetis. Remember when Achilles and Agamemnon in book 1 had their struggle, Achilles is upset because he's lost his war prize. He laments to his mother and asks her to do something, to ensure that the Greeks suffer. Thetis goes to Zeus and says, allow the Trojans to be triumphant so that they come back begging Achilles to return. So Zeus does help the Trojans, and they're doing quite well. The Greeks are able, they're able to camp near the Greek ships. And it's at this point we have this book 9, where often called the embassy to Achilles. The Greeks are desperate. They really want to have Achilles return, and Agamemnon decides, okay, well, I'll give back Briseis, the war prize, as well as give Achilles other gifts, and he organizes this embassy of 3 heroes: Ajax, Phoenix, or Phoenix is another pronunciation I've heard, and Odysseus, and for all 3 of them to go to offer these gifts from Agamemnon. Note, Agamemnon doesn't go himself, and doesn't go and say, sorry, I was a bit prideful there, obviously, let's not let this get between us. We have a larger purpose. I give you all these things. Please forgive me. Let's try to work together, whatever that speech entails. He doesn't go, he sends these 3 heroes instead to extend the offer. When they arrive at Achilles' tent, Achilles, they find he's playing the lyre and singing Clea Andron, so the glories of man. So he's portrayed as, remember, Kleos is glory, and what you're seeking are this Kleos that people will sing and talk about you afterwards. So the Kleos is in the form of poets singing about you, others talking about you, those kinds of things. So Achilles, instead of becoming the subject matter of these poems and songs written about great heroes, becomes the poet, so to speak. And one thing that's, I don't know if it's studied well enough, but I find interesting every time I read the Iliad is this, and the Odyssey, is this notion of the role of the poet that's kind of subtly in the background. So we see it here, Achilles as hero, when he's, let's say, not hero in action, can also be heroic as singer of action. So poet and warrior as kind of 2 poles, but two kind of sides of a same coin. Also, what we'll see in book 18 is the whole depiction of Hephaestus creating this shield for Achilles. He creates this whole cosmos on this shield, and describes all of history. And really, what's happening there, we'll see, is is a depiction of the poet's art in painting a world or describing a world, so to speak, and the movement and action within a world. So too here we have this figure for poetry, Achilles stepping in for that. And Achilles greets his friends cordially and offers them a meal. Now, a keynote here, Achilles needs to learn and is suffering, let's say, from a short-sightedness at the beginning of the Iliad because he's, let's say, overly attached to his war prize. But in every respect, we can see Achilles as a great hero. In this, whereas Agamemnon does not come off to the same extent as a great hero. So Achilles here offers the friends a meal, which is in keeping with the standards of Xenia. Now, I've mentioned that in a previous lecture, which is the whole cultural makeup for the Greeks around the guest-host relationship, okay? So the expectations, the important cultural emphasis that the Greeks put on the fact that one had to be so generous to strangers or friends that visited, and provide gifts, meal, etc. to these guests, and again, of course, the expectations of the guest to the host as well. Achilles does this. He remembers Xenia. Agamemnon, on the other hand, had to be reminded by Nestor in the same book, book 9, earlier in book 9, he had to be reminded by Nestor that they were having this mini council with other generals, and Nestor said, oh, maybe you should get some food out, right? You know, you've got guests. So Odysseus's appeal. So I won't go through these speeches, but I won't go through the text of the speeches, but I'll just refer to them. So Odysseus's appeal is to honor, and he points out the Greeks' distress and that all the honors Achilles can gain from Agamemnon by returning to battle. And a Phoenix's appeal is to a sense of family. So Phoenix has been this old friend of the family, and he calls on him to remember these old times when, you know, Phoenix was holding him as a baby, and, you know, and Achilles even spat up on him when he was a baby, you know, and he wants him to look back at all these times of his attachment to family and family expectations. And then Ajax's appeal is to Achilles as a fellow warrior, as a comrade, and saying, you know, we really need you, buddy, out there. You know, things are getting tight. You know, it would really be helpful if you were right beside me. So Achilles rejects them, and in rejecting Odysseus's appeal to honor, etc., in a way he's rejecting the whole heroic ideal. He's placing long life above honor, and he's, in a way, he's saying that he's willing to fight for glory, but he says there's no reason to fight if the prizes of honor are taken away by Agamemnon. That's one way of looking at it, but in another way of looking at it, looks like the speech is kind of saying, I don't even want to fight for glory and honor at all, because none of those are as important as long life. And he goes in, I won't go to this speech, but in lines 497 to 504, he refers to, and I highly recommend you go and look at those lines, the two fates that his mother Thetis, who is a goddess and who knows these things, the two fates that his mother Thetis told him awaited him. One would be, you know, if you stay in Troy, you'll achieve great honor, great glory, but your life will be short. If you go home, you will have no glory, but you will live a long life. And in his response to the embassy, he's basically saying, well, a lot of prizes and stuff like that, none of that's worth anything if I'm dead. So I would say I need to take life over wealth and honor. So it seems he's rejecting the heroic ideal in this embassy. So the embassy points to a couple things, because it points very sharply to this choice that's in front of everyone, especially in front of these warriors who are facing life and death, but in front of all of us as we kind of go through our lives, it kind of points to the human condition and the meaning we make of our lives in the face of mortality. Okay, so the Iliad's often referred to as the poem of death, and I would say it's not just because a lot of people die in it, that's for sure. So there's poem of death because it portrays a lot of death, but also because the meaning of mortality is explored so fundamentally in the poem. And you could say the resolution of the whole poem turns on Achilles' final acceptance of the human condition, including death. So including the death of his loved Patroclus and the fact that he will die, and that there's not much there's not much to compensate one for that, the fact that they're going to die. You can tell oneself in this Greek worldview, you can tell yourself, okay, well, maybe people will remember me afterwards, but it's small comfort when someone thinks about it profoundly, as Achilles does. This is going to, okay, so so he talks about, in his description of his two possible fates, Achilles links Kleos with this adjective aptheton, meaning imperishable. And this imperishable glory is what, the heroic warrior ultimately fights for, and what is bestowed by the epic poetry itself. But there's a certain paradox to this imperishable glory, like this glory that will live on, because you can only get this kind of immortality, this living on, by either losing one's own life or taking life, right? So there's this paradox is at work. And this is kind of nicely captured in the words of Sarpedon later in the book, book 12, his words to his comrade Glaucus on the paradox of glory. Ah, my friend, if you and I could escape this fray and live forever, never a trace of age, immortal, I would never fight on the front lines again, or command you to the field where men win fame. But now, as it is, the fates of death await us, thousands poised to strike, and not a man alive can flee them or escape. So in we go for attack, give our enemy glory or win it for ourselves. That's kind of sums up quite succinctly the fundamental decision. There's really no other choice. You got to go into battle, that you have to do that. And what is going to happen is you're going to be victorious and win glory for oneself, or you're going to be the source of that glory for the enemy. So I think I mentioned this briefly in an earlier lecture, but part of what's going on here is this notion of, let's say, in terms of glory and mortality is the notion of what happens after death for the ancient Greek. And for the Greeks, the psyche, the soul or mind, leaves the body and goes to the underworld. It's not the equivalent of Christian hell or anything like that. It's definitely not heaven, but it's this kind of vague, unsubstantial existence. So Achilles, for instance, in the Iliad, book 23, he sees a ghost of Patroclus, his friend who's about to die, who in book 16 you've already read. His friend Patroclus, he sees this ghost and he says, ah, God, so even in death's strong house there is something left, a ghost, a phantom true, but no real breath of life. So it's an insubstantial existence. It's this phantom-like existence without in order to discourse with these ghosts, Odysseus, when he descends to the underworld in the Odyssey, has to give this sacrifice of blood, and it's only after they've drank this blood can they actually think and talk, these ghosts. Other than that, they're kind of floating around without a real kind of conscious presence and without the ability to speak. So it's not all that to say, it's not a view of the afterlife that's designed to spark a lot of well, I'm going to die, so that's okay, things will be better, and this is not an important passage, as opposed to, let's say, other worldly religions. So Christianity being a prevalent one, where the afterlife is presented favorably to this life. So as I mentioned as well previously, when we were talking about Odysseus meets Achilles in the underworld, and Achilles says in the Odyssey, when Odysseus sees Achilles, right? Because remember, in the Iliad, we still have Achilles alive. Achilles is going to kill Hector in the Iliad. And then after the Iliad, in other stories that are not available to us, Achilles is going to be killed by Paris, okay? The Odyssey takes place after the fall of Troy, so after that's taken place. The Odyssey depicts Odysseus on his way home. On his way home, he has to visit the underworld in order to get some guidance on how to get back. He sees Achilles, who had died earlier, in the underworld, and he has a little chat with him, and says, boy, you must, Odysseus says, oh, wow, Achilles, good to see you. You must really love it. Existence must be great for you because you were always the best. You were the best at everything. And the Achilles is not happy. He's saying, don't give me this, don't give me that BS, basically. And this is the speech he says, no winning words, no, none of that crap, right? No winning words about death to me, shining Odysseus. By God, I'd rather slave on earth for another man, some dirt poor tenant farmer who scrapes to keep alive, than rule down here for the breathless dead. So then rule down here over all the breathless dead. So Achilles says, I'd rather still be alive. I'd rather be the worst condition possible than be the king of the underworld. So Plato, and I think it was Taylor at the beginning of this lecture mentioned the kind of the parallels to Plato's Republic. And here's one. So in Plato's Republic, Socrates questions the poetic depiction of the underworld. So they're trying to, in the Republic, they're trying to think of what would be an ideal way, let's say, to construct a city-state, a community. And they say, well, we have to really think about how we educate the rulers, and well, everyone, but most in particular the rulers. And right now, as I remember, I said, Homer was kind of their educator. All kids read Homer and knew Homer. So Homer was their model, their ideal, their educator. And Plato's saying, is it good that the kids are modeling themselves on Homer, and that depiction of what life's all about, and he takes this quote from the Odyssey of Achilles saying that he'd rather be a landless serf than ruler of the underworld. And Socrates says, I don't know, if we use that, then people will not want to die for their community, maybe. So that's one example of, let's say, questioning the value system before them that the philosophers did, and questioning the Homeric value system. But within the Homeric value system, glory after death is the only real enduring existence one can hope for. The other point I'll make here is that Kleos in the Iliad is human. It's something that humans get. The gods they do not get glory. It's in the same way. Because of this crucial distinction of mortality. So the gods are athanatoi, or the deathless ones. So thanatos is death. So Thanos from Marvel Comics, is kind of etymologically related to this Greek for thanatos. So Greek for death is thanatos, and athanatoi means they're deathless. They're without death. So the A is like our it's a privative. So they're undying. And humans are thanatoi. They are the dying ones. So that's the crucial distinction between mortals and immortals. And the gods provide this contrast that highlights and sharpens the sense of the human condition as fundamentally tied to their fact that they die. I want to mention now this briefly, this notion of Aristeia. We'll see it a couple times. So it's a prevalent feature in the Iliad. Well, it's a bit in the Aeneid as well. I don't think any of the books I had you read really shows that, but it's in the Aeneid as well in the other books. But it's tied to this word best or excellence, and it's the excellence of a warrior in their kind of their most shining brilliance of being warlike. And Achilles' Aristeia, for instance, is the culmination of the poem. But there are other Aristeia, including that of Diomedes, Agamemnon, Hector, Patroclus. And here are some components. I won't go through these. I'll let you read those. And not all of these are in every Aristeia, okay? But it's a type scene. It's a type of scene where a hero will be shown as, let's say, inspired by a god or goddess to this height of warlike prowess that no one can stop them, not even gods on the other side to some extent. And they go on this kind of killing rampage for a while. And it's a type scene because it's going to have the same structure in different versions. So when Achilles does it, it has a similar structure, and Diomedes does it as similar structure, what have you, and it's tied to that kind of oral formulaic theory, right? Remember, the oral formulaic theory of how oral poems would be composed would be around the poet saying, okay, well, I'm going to have Achilles do a lot of good stuff today, and Achilles is going to arm himself, and I know all the things to say when someone gets armed. So they put on the well-ironed greaves and blah, 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 and I got the rhymes all set for that, and I don't have to think about that too much. And then I'm going to talk about the breastplate and how it got lapsed on tight and it shined and gleamed. And then I'm going to talk about the helmet and how the crest waved, etc. So there's those elements that can be repeated for each with lines that can be repeated, and then the elements themselves can be plugged in as needed to, let's say, stretch out a story. So I'm saying, okay, well, I want to do the Aristeia of Achilles. I think in this particular sitting, I got some time to kill here. I've got a bit more time. People don't seem to be getting tired around the campfire, so to speak. So I'm going to pull in an arming. I'm going to do the prowess. I'm going to get him wounded for a bit, and then I'm going to have him return, and then I'm going to have the battle over a fallen enemy. Sometimes different mixes are there, but not all elements. Okay, but those are the general elements that you'll see in this one of these Aristeia. So the gods in the Iliad, I want to talk about that quickly. Obviously, they play an important role. So the gods, the one thing I want to say, the gods are concrete and real agents in the story, right? So some people will try to say you try to explain them away, right? They're metaphors or something like that, okay? Because we live in a godless age, I hate to say it, we don't believe that there are these elemental beings that are out there that control cosmic forces. So when you have people who do movies, for instance, of the Iliad or the Odyssey. So there was, I think I referenced this movie called Troy that came out maybe 10 or 15 years ago with Brad Pitt as Achilles. So an interesting movie. I encourage you to see it. I thought it was pretty good, but it had to take a modern stance at it, right? So it had to say, well, what are we going to do with these gods, right? People might not buy that. Okay, so there's no gods there at all, really, as far as I can remember. And then so that's one approach, is to just take it, okay, well, every time they referenced gods, it was just a metaphor for something else. Okay, so for instance, here's one way of taking that would be in book 1, it says, the narrator says that Athena stopped Achilles from killing Agamemnon, because they're fighting and they're discussing in the council, and they're kind of arguing. And Achilles doesn't suffer fools and he's such a a tough warrior, you're really taking your life into your own hands if you're getting him very angry. So it shows him reaching for his sword, and his thought crossed his mind that he's going to go and kill Agamemnon. And then Athena stopped him and grabbed him by the hair, or grabbed him somewhere. So Athena, if you want to take that metaphorically and take the gods out of it, is to say, well, it's just a metaphor for what she stands for. It's a metaphor for wisdom. So Athena, let's say, in one aspect, is a god of wisdom. And then, so Achilles' wisdom made him think better of it. So it was, for that reason, he did not kill Agamemnon. So you can take the gods. Some people have tried to argue this. I disagree. I don't think you can. If you read Homer. Some people would say, okay, well, you can do that with every instance of the gods, that they're just metaphors for, let's say, human drives or natural forces. But there are a lot of, as I say in the second sub-bullet there's many times where such an explanation is simply impossible. It just doesn't work. So Aphrodite physically removes Paris from the battlefield in book 3. So Aphrodite's love or passion, but we can't really say that physically moved Paris from the battlefield. He's physically whisked away. People see him disappear. It's not a metaphor. It's a physical intervention. The other point I'll just say is that, and it goes to a point I've been talking about in terms of mortality, but in general, they offer a contrast with human affairs, and to really underscore the meaning of human existence. I'll just point out too, the English term God is used to translate the Greek term theos, but we can't equate it with other notions of God that we might have. Okay, so other notions that we have in the modern world that's had a legacy of kind of the Judeo-Christian or Islamic worldview in the West and other parts of the world, have certain notions of God and baggage around it that we need to kind of forget. Okay, so they're not moral. So the gods are not consistently good or merciful or just. The gods are not omniscient, so they know more than humans, but they don't know everything. They're not omnipotent. Okay, so omniscience means knowing everything. Omnipotent means they're all powerful. So they're not all powerful. Okay, they're very powerful, but they're not all powerful. They are not transcendent. Okay, so they do not exist in a realm beyond the physical. They exist within the universe. They exist in the physical universe, and they didn't create it. They're part of it. Okay. They are not loving. They love particular human beings that, they're special favorites. Often it's a child that they had with a human mother or something like that, as in the case of Sarpedon. But they otherwise it's not as though they're caring for human beings. So we have to get all of those kind of moral and transcendental notions of God out of our head when we're thinking about the Greek gods. So what they are is rather kind of extensions of kind of anthropomorphized forces of nature that came up to embody other aspects and attributes and have stories attached to them. So their characters started to build up as these stories attached to them. But basically, in kind of the unfolding of Greek religion, it was these anthropomorphizations of nature's forces of nature. And in the Iliad, we get this, let's say, double view of the gods. We get from the point of the humans, the gods are awe-inspiring, they're dangerous, they're powerful. But the epic also, let's say, pulls back the veil and shows them as they are, as these kind of petty and trivial beings to some extent, right? They're weak, they change, they have these petty squabbles among one another. They're undignified. The scene that we'll talk about in the next lecture of Zeus being seduced by Hera is kind of this undignified portrait of these gods. And they're not always portrayed as so petty. They're not this petty or shallow in the Odyssey. So why here? And I think one answer I would say, why does Homer portray them so lightly here, is to really shine a light, I would say, on how this contrast between the mortal and the immortal, and how the immortal is in a way insignificant and kind of can be laughed at, and all the tragedy and meaning is in the choices around a finite human existence. As Achilles, there's some lines from Achilles here from book 22, in his confrontation with Apollo. Now you've robbed me of great glory, saved their lives with all your deathless ease. Nothing for you to fear, no punishment to come. So you did it with deathless ease. You've robbed me of my glory, but that was nothing to you. That didn't mean anything, So the epic really shines a light on the nobility and beauty, let's say, proper to human existence that way. As I said, the gods, when they participate in human conflict, it really highlights the insignificance of their actions. I mentioned Aphrodite is taunted after she's wounded by Diomedes. Ares, very similarly, he's wounded by Diomedes as well. Apollo kicks down the Greek walls, and it's as though he's a child kicking down a sandcastle. So for them, interaction is childlike, it's playful, it's inconsequential. Another thing I'll point to is when they battle one another, that there's similar outcome. There's book 1 has this scene of kind of domestic bickering, and but it ends with they go to bed, they're fine, they make peace and make up, and it's the scene of domestic bickering and peace is in contrast with the really significant war that's going between Greeks and Trojans, and what's totally at stake there is lives of many, and many will be sold into slavery, what have you. So heroes. So we've talked kind of about the distinction between Greek immortals, the gods, and mortals, and heroes represent this kind of in-between space between gods and mortals. So the heroes are godlike in their ability to be preeminent and transcend the human fray in their domain of activity. So that they're godlike, and they're often portrayed by the narrator as godlike, with the one proviso that they're still mortal. So Helen and Achilles, I would say, are most consistently portrayed as godlike. One in the field of, let's say, beauty and love, and kind of the realm of the city and peace, and then in the realm of war and bringing death, it's Achilles. So you have these two heroes as kind of conduits between the gods and mortals. I wanted to say a word too about fate. I mentioned that in passing. So part of what's proper to humans is that they're mortal, that their life is finite, and it is a certain portion. Okay, so the lot of my life is a certain length of time that has been allotted to me. That's this Greek notion of fate. Okay, so in Greek, it's moira is the Greek word for fate, which means share or portion. So mereology is the study of parts in relation to whole. So a part or a portion is from this Greek term for moira, or part or portion. And it's, as I said, so it can be your fate, and when it's applied to humans, it's also, let's say, the share or portion of your life. In the diagram there, we have, of course, the three great fates, Clotho, who spins the yard, the cloth of, or the thread of one's life, and Lachesis, who's is the apportioner who measures out the portion that will be one's life, and then Atropos is the one who does the cutting, that violent act of saying it must end here. Okay, so this is very much the kind of the Greek sense of that you have that portion of existence that is proper to one and is allotted to them, and you can't transcend that. The gods and fate. Now, it's a complicated relationship. So the gods seem to know what the humans' fates are, like what has been apportioned to them. For instance, Zeus knows that Achilles must kill Hector, and it will happen. But they can't change fates. It's not as though they can go in. Again, remember, they're not transcendent. They're not all powerful. So Thetis cannot change Achilles' fates. There's an interesting sequence later in the Iliad where Zeus considers intervening to help Sarpedon, but it's made clear that he can't really do that. So with that, I'd like to close the lecture on books 2 to 9. I don't see any comments or questions, but I'll wait for a second if there's any comments or questions on the preceding. Seeing none, we'll close it there. As I said, next time we're going to, well, the next lecture is already pre-recorded for books 10 to 17. So there'll be a summary of books 10 to 15. We'll look at books 16 and 17, where we see the death of Patroclus. I see a hand there, Caleb.
Yeah, sorry, Professor. So I have a question. It's more concerning to Achilles, and in terms of him fighting versus him not fighting. So you mentioned that his mother had told him that if he went to fight, yes, he would have honor, but at the end of the day, he would have a short life. Versus if he doesn't fight, he doesn't have any honor, but he has a longer life. So my question is, if even though he knew, why did he still, like, what drew him to want to fight?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it's good to reflect on. I don't think there's an easy answer. The full kind of consideration of the answer would be around this heroic ideal, right? This heroic ideal of the Greeks that life is only worth living if it does have a certain sense of honor, and that, you know, remember we read that passage in book 6 of we just read it in this lecture, how Hector says, you know, he'd rather die than have shame of the community, because he did not fight to try to preserve it. So there's that, you know, and this sense that it's what makes life worth meaningful anyway, right? So his life is going to be long, but it's still going to be, it's going to have a certain length of existence, and then he's going to die, right? Like all of us, right? We're all going to die, and what's going to give it meaning? So in the Greek warrior ethos, in a lot of ways, it gives it meaning in relation to the honor and brilliant deeds that one can achieve as a warrior. Mind you, that seems to be the outset. That seems to be what drives Achilles. But as we saw in book 9, he seems to renounce that, right? He says, well, actually, I don't know, maybe I would take long life, right? The embassy to Achilles doesn't get him back. You know, they offer him honor and glory. It doesn't get him back. What we'll see, what gets him back later is the death of Patroclus, and revenge gets him back. So another driving motive, let's say. So he wants to go and fight because he wants to kill Hector, because he's feeling so much grief at loss. So it's another side, another dimension of the confrontation with mortality. Okay, so if I'm looking at my own death, if I'm looking at my own life as being finite, I say, well, what gives it meaning? Well, maybe a life of honor, maybe not. I don't know. I asked that question, and Achilles asks that question in a way in book 9. And then also, okay, well, but I'm also losing loved ones, and how can I have meaning in my existence when I'm losing these loved ones, and their life is also finite? And so one kind of answer is revenge, and I'm going to kill Hector, and I'm going to drag his body around in the dust. And then finally, I think what we see in book 24 is he has to have this aha moment, and him in this incredible scene with Priam that we'll read, he has to come to accept that he will die, and maybe it's got meaning, maybe it doesn't. And he has to accept that his friends and loved ones will die, including Patroclus, and that that's just the way of existence. And that Priam has to accept that Hector and all his other sons died and will die. So that's a bit of an answer. I hope it's a start, but do you have a follow-up question there, Caleb?
Yeah. So concerning that, can we then say that there's like a parallel between when we hear about this in book 9 to when we see him again in the Underworld, when he's talking about how he would much rather be like a serf and work the land than to rule the Underworld? So does that also mean that he didn't really want to fight, like he's regretting that he took the fight? Or do you think that he would have been happier if he had, like, not fought and still ended up dying?
Yeah, it's good. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if we'll ever have an answer to that latter question, like about whether he would have been happier. I think I think what's consistent between the Odyssey portrayal of him and book 9 is this notion that he questions whether it's worth it. Okay, so in book 9 he says, like, you can give me all these awards, you can say I'm great and everything like that, but if I die, it's no good, and what worth is it? And it's not worth my life, right? So he actually raises that question. And then in the Odyssey, as you said, right, in the Odyssey in the Underworld, he says something very similar. I'd rather be alive than to be king of the Underworld. So what really drives him there, as I said, it's what we see in the Iliad. What drives him is this combination of a drive for honor, but also revenge. This sense of loss of other loved ones, and can I repay Hector for doing that? But also this question of whether or not honor and glory is everything. He questions it. He doesn't completely dismiss it. Like, he doesn't get the ships and go home, right? He still wants to stay there and have some glory and honor, I think you could say.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
So those are good questions, Caleb. Thank you very much. And unless there are other questions, okay, great. Let's adjourn then, and I'll see everyone for next Monday's lecture. As I mentioned, the Wednesday lecture is already there, pre-recorded. Have a great night.